Finally, I've finished the countdown video about the top 10 video games I played in 2020. To say this video is overdue would be an understatement. I do tend to release these countdowns a few months into the next year, but waiting until September is pretty drastic. Oh well, at least I actually bothered to make a video like this for 2020, which I didn't do for 2019, because while I had played enough games back then to make a top 10, I didn't play or like those games enough to warrant a video. I spent far more time playing games in 2020 however, with a much better selection, so I just had to make this video. Was 2020 better than 2017 or 2018 though? Keep in mind that not just games released within 2020 can make the list, but also games from earlier years that I first played in 2020, otherwise this wouldn't have been a top 10. On that topic, let's start counting down from that number.
Ding 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 ding.
I'm starting off the list with a video game that, despite not being released within 2020, seemed to be the most popular game of the year, at least in terms of memes. It was so popular in fact that even though I wasn't really interested in it, I still played it. I didn't play it for long though, haven't touched it in a while, and I'm honestly not that fond of it, but it was my only real candidate for the number 10 spot, so that's why it's included. It has a neat premise that there's one or more imposters that try to sabotage the others, while the others try to figure out who the imposters are, meaning the ones in the imposter role have to be careful not to seem sus, whereas the rest have to carefully pay attention to the others around. If you're not an imposter, you have to do some minigames called tasks, and while some of them are annoying, they're fine for the most part. I tend to think of Among Us as Diet Secret Hitler, as that board game has a similar premise and is more fun. But hey, Among Us works really well as a replacement during a pandemic, where you're not guaranteed to meet up with friends. I do think the game has since long run its course though, with plenty of lame memes that have grown really stale, so I highly sympathize with this guy.
Stop posting about Among Us! I'm tired of seeing it!
Oh well, the pandemic seems to be nearing its end, so its relevance will probably fade out soon. Next up is the first SpongeBob game I've played, and while I haven't played much of it, it's been quite fun so far. I got it close to its release near the beginning of 2020, and did the first level, defeating the King Jellyfish, but I've unfortunately been so occupied with other stuff that I haven't gotten back to it since. The first level was quite enjoyable, playing as not only SpongeBob, but also Patrick, the latter probably being my favorite SpongeBob character, given his dumb, yet lovable mannerisms. While they might not talk as much in this game, they're still pretty fun and feel authentic to the show. Mr. Krabs felt a little off due to the voice actor change, but I doubt that really affects the writing for him. SpongeBob and Patrick play differently from each other, which is good. They could have easily just been Echo Fighters and called it a day. Exploring locations from the SpongeBob universe is fun, and so is collecting stuff within them. Combat isn't anything special, but it works, which is often the case for 3D platformers. My biggest issue with this being a remake is that it looks kind of poor. Maybe that's because I've only played it on Switch, but I doubt the other versions on more powerful consoles look anywhere near as good as the Crash, Spyro, or Shadow of the Colossus remakes. It doesn't need to, and it probably wasn't as high of a priority, but it is noticeably inferior. I'll have to get back to this game eventually to have a more well-rounded opinion of it, but from what little I've played of it, it's been fairly fun. "2017 was one of the best years ever for video games, and Nier Automata was hailed as one of the year's best. I sadly can't say the same. Don't get me wrong, the atmosphere of this game is terrific, having some beautiful music and well-designed environments. It's true that the graphics aren't very impressive, but that doesn't really hinder the game's artistry. The writing is some of the most unique and interesting in a video game, even continuing to deliver many new revelations after you've beaten the first playthrough. It's very poetically written, so no wonder the main character is named to be, or not to be? It was a bold twist to kill her off and play as 9S in Day 2, 9s being a great character who continued to surprise me. He's definitely one of the most interesting characters in gaming. It's also one of the most gamey games out there, taking full advantage of its medium to tell this amazing story. From the sounds of it, Nier Automata should be much higher on my list, but sadly, the gameplay brings it down a lot. I liked it at first, even though I did notice that it felt a bit repetitive, but that repetition became tenfold over the 60 hours I played it. I was already kind of worn out when I beat the first playthrough, and it just became worse as I had to play as 9S. I did say he's my favorite character, but I'm not a fan of his hacking minigames. It's reminiscent of the Bentley hacking tank sections in Sly Cooper, and I wasn't really much of a fan of those to begin with, so hacking got old really fast. The regular combat also got old fast, especially since the enemies are absolute bullet sponges that take forever to destroy. It doesn't help that enemies constantly swarm you, and there are barely any ways to defeat them other than to literally hack and slash and shoot. This could have been remedied had there been more than just 3 different pods in total, but there isn't, and even though there are many weapons to collect, they barely feel any different from one another. I hear Nier Replicant's combat is more diverse, so I might get that someday, and hopefully it's a lot more fun than Nier Automata. Sorry for the long and harsh tangent, but the gameplay really brings this game down. It could have been a masterpiece, it certainly is in the other areas, but the dull gameplay prevents it from being a 9 or 10 out of 10 game. Instead, I can't bring myself to give it higher than an 8, same as its number on this list. Many will probably be upset by my decision to put Ape Escape 2 over Nier Automata, but to them I say, reject mankind, return to Monkey. In all seriousness, while Ape Escape 2 definitely isn't anywhere near as interesting, its gameplay is tremendously more fun, even though it's flawed. You'd think the basic premise of capturing monkeys would get boring, but there are so many ways to do it that it doesn't become stale. You constantly get new gadgets without feeling overwhelmed, and most of them are fun to use. The levels don't feel overwhelming either, as you don't need to capture every monkey in every level, but just a set amount, and then go back to catch the rest if you feel so inclined. I haven't revisited the levels myself, but I might in the future, since it really is a fun game. The level design is also very good, even for the last 2 levels that are completely linear, but they felt like true final levels, putting just about every mechanic to use, and in new fun ways at that. The presentation is good too, having some funky music, and varied environments with a nice use of colors. Even though the writing and characters are meh, the monkeys themselves are so expressive, which is impressive for such an old game, and it made hunting them more fun than it would have been otherwise. While I don't consider Ape Escape 2 to be one of the best 3D platformers out there, it's a pretty good one that offers plenty of enjoyment. While the previous games on my list are IPs I've never played until recently, this next entry is from a franchise I'm very familiar with. If you thought me putting Ape Escape 2 over Nier Automata was sinful, then just know that I actually bought Super Mario 3D All-Stars, which is probably punishable by death. I do agree that the price for this was too high, especially considering these are just emulated, which Nintendo is supposedly against, but to be fair, I had neither played Super Mario 64 nor Sunshine before, and it was a good way for me to replay Galaxy on the Switch. That being said, Mario 64 was not worth it, as it's one of the worst games I've ever played, and I'm basically just digging my own grave at this point. It has terrible controls, an even worse camera, badly designed levels, and I hate how you're thrown out of a level for any small mistake, meaning you have to backtrack a lot through these shit shows. It felt like the game was trying to screw me over at every step, and the weirdest thing is that I might have developed Stockholm Syndrome for it, because it was kind of enjoyable despite that, and I finished it in merely 3 or 4 days. It would be an understatement, however, to say that playing Sunshine felt incredibly good right after having suffered through 64. It's immediately clear how much better the controls are, and hovering with the flood improves them even more. It's what 64 desperately needed, as it could have saved me from constantly falling to my death. The whole vibe of Sunshine is also far more welcoming, as the environments are sunny and beautiful, the music is cheery, and there are friendly inhabitants to interact with, even though Mario has to do community service for them. The plot is quite nonsensical as it is in every Mario game, but the premise was pretty funny, Mario being wrongfully accused of vandalizing Isle Delfina with no proper lawyer to back him up. Most of the levels were fun, though there were a lot of similar missions, so I wish there was more variety in them. I was surprised to find out that you can ride Yoshi, and while some of his uses are annoying, he controls well. On the topic of annoyance, this game does have some of the bad designs from 64 that make up the worst aspects of the game. There are some cool secret courses, but the flood removal means you can't save yourself from falling into certain death, and there are no checkpoints in these. If you die enough, you get thrown out of the level, which has always been so unnecessary, and it even happens if you fail certain challenges once, like in the surfing sections, that were really finicky. Overall though, Super Mario Sunshine was a really fun game, with a great feel to it, especially after the absolute travesty that was Super Mario 64. This is the first time I've played a Final Fantasy game, and I didn't expect to like it this much, but here it is in the middle of the list. I wasn't really interested in playing a Final Fantasy game, and I'm not really interested in playing any other than 7, since it seems to appeal to me the most. Rather than being too fantastical, it's very grounded in reality, having a cool steampunk vibe that I dig. It reminds me of Haven City from Jak 2, but in HD, which is awesome, and the world of Midgar seems to be just as fleshed out, if not more. The characters seem to be quite fleshed out as well, although I haven't followed their entire stories yet. I've played it for about 30 hours up until the point where female Cloud, Aerith and Tifa fall into a pit together. I got the game along with PS Plus in February to March, and since I haven't had a good enough reason to be subscribed since, I've had to put the game on hold. You might wonder how it can even qualify for this list then, but that's because I played its demo last year, so I'll count it. Such was the case for Nier Automata as well, even though I didn't get that from PS Plus. In any case, the story and world building have been really fascinating so far, and the characters are very likable. It is kind of annoying how much the game blueballs you, as I've been anticipating to reunite with Avalanche and still haven't, but at least that yearning has made me want to play it more. I do feel that some missions are too long however, especially the one where Cloud, Barret and Tifa tried to blow up another reactor, and it went on for hours in an environment that didn't change much visually or layout wise. That section ended on a pretty easy boss fight, which brings me to my biggest issue with this game. Not that the bosses are too easy, but that the house boss was way too hard. This was pretty much a joke boss that came out of nowhere after supposedly completing all the challenges in a tournament that were piss easy in comparison. Then they throw this ridiculous powerhouse at you. It's not even so much an issue that it's hard, but the fact that it takes about 20 minutes to beat, on top of being hard, especially considering you only have 2 party members and not many abilities or magic power to work with, it made for an atrocious fight that I had to retry plenty of times. That boss alone took me 1 to 2 hours, and brought my enjoyment of the game significantly down. There were some other super frustrating fights, but at least those were fairly short once I managed to beat them. I like the combat a lot more than I expected to, as there are so many different mechanics to utilize, and if certain abilities don't work against certain enemies, you can change them to gain an advantage. I also really like that it's similar to something like Pokemon, but that you can also control the characters amidst the action, carrying out the attacks and dodging yourself. It's very fun and dynamic. Now, I have a bias for Pokemon, so I much prefer those games, but Final Fantasy's gameplay is really fun, at least when the challenges aren't too frustrating to overcome. The game looks super pretty, especially the waifus if you know what I'm saying, and the music is really cool. The cloud dancing section combined both to perfection. That was just wonderful to witness. This is the kind of flair a remake can bring to an old classic. I doubt I would have placed the original version this high. One of the PlayStation 5's launch titles was Insomniac's Spider-Man Miles Morales, and while I didn't have a PS5 at the time, I did manage to play it on PS4. I recently replayed it on my PS5, along with its predecessor, and while it hasn't moved from its number 4 spot on this list, I'm now more confident in its placement, because I was maybe not in the right mood the first time I played it, meaning I didn't appreciate it as much as I should have. Now, however, I like it almost as much as its predecessor, and it has several improvements over it. The combat, world and web swinging are mostly the same, but have been tweaked a bit to make them feel fresh. Miles has venom powers, allowing him to stun foes and hit with impact, and it's a nice way to switch things up a bit. He can also use gadgets, though some have unfortunately not returned from the predecessor, but it makes sense given this is a shorter game. This sequel is of course set in New York yet again, but the state is now surrounded by snow and some awesome pink lighting, so swinging through it feels different from before, especially since Miles' swinging animations are different to differentiate him and Peter, which has great attention to detail. While I do prefer Peter Parker, Miles is a good character in his own right, and I'm really glad Insomniac decided to make a standalone game about Miles, so that he can be fleshed out before the next big Spider-Man game. He comes with some different music too, that's more hip-hop, rap and trap, which sounds pretty cool when mixed in with the usual Spider-Man themes. Miles has different suits too, and they're definitely cooler than the ones Peter Parker can wear. I love that Miles can wear a suit from Into the Spider-Verse, which is one of the best movies I've seen, and it's a funny detail that his character model can run in a reduced frame rate, just like in the movie. I mentioned that this game is shorter than the last one, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It takes about 10 hours to finish, so it's similar to the length of a Ratchet & Clank game, and getting 100% completion is nowhere near as monotonous as it was in Spider-Man PS4. Plus, I found the side content in Miles Morales and payoff to them more satisfying, gaining support from the people of Harlem, learning about his dad and uncle, and even listening to recordings of his dead father as he's doing a scavenger hunt. That was very emotional. You can even get help from Spider-Man the Cat, who's involved in finisher moves, and completing the side stuff gives you some rocking suits. It sounds like I prefer this game over Spider-Man PS4, and I definitely do in several areas, but I thought the PS4 game had a far better story. It was still good in Miles Morales, but not nearly as interesting, and I much preferred the main story missions in the PS4 game too. Miles Morales as a whole isn't far behind though, and I can imagine the next big Spider-Man game being awesome now that there are 2 professional Spider-Men to play as. Even though I reviewed Artstream last year, I didn't touch much on Dreams itself, and although Artstream is my favorite dream in it for sure, it alone wouldn't have made the top 3 in this list. The Dreamiverse is massive. There are so many fan-created games to play, and while many of them aren't that good, some are truly special and feel like labors of love. As you may know, A Hat in Time is one of my favorite games ever, and in Dreams' early stages, someone had already made a grand a hit dream. Sure, it's grand mainly because the world is huge, but there's still plenty to do in it, like platforming challenges, riding a motorcycle, flying a helicopter, piloting a boat, catching fish, and more. If that wasn't enough, the controls for Hat Kid are actually not that far off from how she controls in the game, which is amazing. The world itself is beautiful, looking akin to the world of Jak and Daxter, with precursor-like architecture. That's just one dream out of thousands, and there are many other good ones out there. I didn't play much of the Crash Bandicoot Twinsanity dream, and I haven't played the game it replicates, but it felt really good to play as Crash in it. A friend of mine also made a Crash Bandicoot dream, which was played by Naughty Dog and PewDiePie, and got over 10,000 likes, which is really impressive. It's so cool that you can gain a name for yourself if your creations get enough traction. Maybe you can even be noticed by big game companies that way. The Dreamiverse very much feels like YouTube, especially since there's so much variety, and it's not just games. There's also art, animations, realistic looking food, and lots of dank memes. I love how the Wario car crash meme became a trend on there. If you don't want to create anything yourself, that's completely fine, because you can choose to just play others' creations instead, which is what I do. I did make my logo in Dreams for my anniversary video last year, but I haven't spent much of my time trying to figure out how the Dreams engine works, so I usually just play stuff on there instead. I have a friend who does the opposite, usually creating Dreams instead. He recreates levels from Crash, Spyro, Rayman and the like, which is so cool, and so much work goes into it. I think Dreams is a masterpiece of a game, as it contains an in-depth game engine that has spawned countless games, and continues to spawn countless more. I only wish it wasn't limited to PlayStation, since a game like this should be available everywhere. Also, I don't put it higher on the list because there aren't many amazingly polished long games on there yet. Those will probably come with time though, as the unfinished ones are developed over the years, like the Avatar: The Last Airbender game, which will take extremely long to complete, but it should be worth it in the end. For now though, there are plenty of polished short experiences, like The Pilgrim, Comic Sans, and Ratchet & Clank Bull Attack, which was actually made by an Insomniac. I was also blown away by this incredible recreation of Minas Tirith from The Lord of the Rings. I just had to replicate Denethor's death scene. There's really no limit to what you can do here, and to those who want Rayman 4, to them I say, in your dreams! I did not expect to put this game so high up, but here we are. While I really like Crash 3 and fairly enjoy Crash 2, they're definitely not some of my favorite games, and I don't care much for the rest, besides the Insane Trilogy, which managed to make the first Crash fun. Even so, I was actually really excited for Crash 4, both because it's a modern sequel to old platformers that haven't aged the best, and because it looked great in the trailers. I agree with the title, it's about time that Crash finally got a proper sequel, and this looked like it. Despite this, when I first finished Crash 4, I wasn't sure if I preferred it over 3. That's because, while it had many improvements, it also frustrated me at many points, due to its ridiculous difficulty. However, I feel like something clicked in Cortex Castle. Even though it was the level where I died over 70 times, which was the most by far, I wasn't frustrated, unlike with the other levels. I was more so impressed at how brilliantly challenging it was, while laughing like a maniac. It's the only level that truly chains together the 4 masks in rapid succession, and while it's tough as balls, it's so well designed and feels tremendously satisfying to pull off. I soon began replaying the levels, and felt a lot more confident approaching them. I instantly got the perfect relic in the first level, and instead of dying 30 times trying to get all the boxes in the second level, I aced it my second time around, and it was like that for me with most of the other levels too, even later ones. Toxic Tunnels used to be the level I hated the most, but I actually really like it now, and I can almost do a flawless run of Cortex Castle. Whereas I used to be unsure if I preferred Crash 4 over 3, now I'm completely certain, and it's not just recency bias talking. No, Crash 4 made me replay the original trilogy. Well, I still didn't finish Crash 1 because its save system demotivates me, but I did finish the others. I even replayed and finished the Insane Trilogy, which is definitely my preferred version of those games. It was in that marathon that I figured out why I much prefer Crash 4 over them. I always found the original trilogy quite hard, especially the first 2, and I now know why. It's not that their level designs are all that tough, but rather that Crash's janky controls and movement make the levels tough. Don't get me wrong, there are some inherently hard levels, like Slippery Climb and Cold Hard Crash, but they would be way easier if they were in Crash 4, with its much tighter controls. Maybe I sound hypocritical for enjoying Crash 4's challenge and not the original trilogies, as Crash 4 is considered the toughest by far, but the difference is that I'm not dying due to wonky controls, but rather difficult level design. I think the controls in Crash 4 are practically perfect, and I love how the developers have taken full advantage of their capabilities, pushing the player to their limit, so that everyone who's skilled enough to finish the game becomes a pro Crash gamer. Is it too challenging at points? Yes, especially going for 100%, which I'm not going to do. But I'm really glad Toys for Bob decided to go the route of intricate level designs, with amazing controls to accommodate them, instead of the original trilogy's approach. I still like that trilogy, but even Crash 3 wouldn't make it higher on this list than number 5. I've already spent longer on this entry than I think that I should, but I do have to address some other aspects of the game. Writing isn't really a key aspect of Crash, but it's a bit more prominent in 4, and I found it pretty good. It's a shame how quickly Dr. Nefarious Tropy got wasted, along with his interdimensional counterpart. They showed a lot of promise that didn't really amount to much. Them not being the final boss did lead to Cortex traveling back to 1996 though, which was an awesome homage, leading to some of the best levels in boss fight. The interactions between the characters were fun too, especially those between former enemies. The levels are beautiful and varied with cool themes, and the animation in the gameplay and especially cutscenes are astounding. Crash 4's main theme slaps, but unfortunately the rest of the soundtrack goes mostly unnoticed and is very forgettable. This is one aspect that the original trilogy did far better, having so many cool and recognizable tracks. Overall though, Crash 4 is way more fun than I expected it to be, made me want to replay the original trilogy, along with its remakes, and catapulted Crash Bandicoot in my ranking of video game franchises. This is the first time I've loved a Crash game, and to that I say, it's about time. I bet no one saw this one coming, but if you did, I'll assume you watched my review of the game, thought of the most logical 2020 contender, or saw the number transitions with Ghost of Tsushima music in the background. I won't say too much about Ghost of Tsushima because of that, but I do have some new things to say about it. The gameplay is kind of slow in the beginning as you learn the sword stances, and the massive length contributes to repetition, but there's still a lot of variety. You gain plenty of weapons and abilities over the course of the adventure, especially if you don't just do the story missions, and they're pretty helpful and fun to use. I do actually prefer Crash 4's gameplay, but to be fair, that's what that game excels at. Ghost of Tsushima on the other hand is highly competent in every field, having strong gameplay and even stronger writing and presentation. Tsushima is such a rich island, and the characters in focus are fleshed out and well written. The story itself is interesting and has some really powerful moments, especially towards the end, where I had to make a tough choice that made me reflect quite a bit. As for the presentation, while there are some weirdly animated character models, the game is generally beautiful, with one of the prettiest maps I've explored. Just look at the colorful fields of flowers, the leaves from the vine, the haiku sunsets, it's all so artistic. The beauty is accentuated by the accompanying background music. This game really has one of the most pleasant soundtracks I've heard, and the most emotional themes really touch the heartstrings. This is truly an amazing game, and even though I haven't fully replayed it yet, I appreciate it more than back when I gave it the score of 8.75 out of 10. It's definitely a 9, maybe even a 9.25, and I love that Sucker Punch continues to build on it. I haven't played much of Ghost of Tsushima's Legends mode. Like I said earlier, I rarely ever get PS Plus, but I have tried some of the story missions offline, and while the main game is a lot more fun, these were still pretty decent, at least the visuals were superb. I'm more interested in the Iki Island expansion, which looks like it'll be a ton of fun, not to mention relaxing, just soaking in the atmosphere of this new gorgeous place. Sucker Punch really struck gold with this one. Even though it didn't get the highest scores, it gained a large following and was a fan-favorite underdog of 2020. That's it for the top 10 video games I played in 2020, and it was a really strong year for gaming. Sure, my favorites don't reach the enjoyment I have for my favorites of 2017, or my favorite of 2018, but there was a good quantity of quality games, especially on PlayStation, and I actually bothered to cover the year, unlike 2019. At this point of a countdown video like this, I usually talk about how I think the next year will compare, but 2021 is over halfway done as this video is released. Then again, not many have been released due to delays. It seems most might come out within the second half, and if you've seen the video about my most anticipated games, I am looking forward to quite a few. It looks like my most anticipated game, Horizon Forbidden West, won't be out until 2022, but 2021 seems pretty strong regardless, especially with the release of the best Ratchet & Clank since a crack in time. Whether the rest release this year or not, there are many great looking games on the horizon. I'm Arcadon, and hopefully, you'll see me next time!